In today's video, we're going to go over the quadratic formula and some things that we learned throughout this unit as a study guide for your test on Monday. So the first thing we learned about at the beginning of the unit was zero product property. If you can recall, or even if you're super confused on what it is, if you remember, what we have to do is figure out how to break this down from standard form to factored form. Remember, factored form looks something like this. And instead of just breaking it down, we're actually just setting it equal to 0 to see where it's going to hit on my x-axis. That's what the zero product property is. Alright, so we got our m's for m squared. Now I'm going to factor out this 2. The only factors of 2 are 2 and 1. And I know that it's a positive, so that means either both answers need to be negative or both answers need to be positive. How I can tell the difference if it's going to be negative or positive is I'm going to look at this 3 here, my B term. B as in Bravo. If it's positive, that means, well, they're both going to be positive. There we go. So I have both positive 2 and positive 1. And the only difference between factoring it out like this and the zero product property is just, again, setting it equal to 0. So in order to get m by itself, I would subtract a 2 on this side. And subtract a 1 for the other one. And my two x values, where it's going to hit on my x-axis, is at -2 and a -1. So now let's look over here. My factors of 64, because this is my C term. The reason I know it's my C term is because there's no letter attached to it, meaning there's no X or Q or P or whatever attached to it. So I'm going to list out the factors of 64. Can 64 go into 3? Nope. 64 go into 4? Yep. 4 and 16. 5 doesn't go into it. 6 does not go into it. 7 doesn't. 8 does though. And then 9 does not. So we're going to stop there. Alright. So now what we got here is we have no B term, meaning I don't have like this 3m, I don't have like a 2x or a 6x or anything in between them. So I know that that means that they both cancel out, meaning I need to have the same number. So the only time it's ever the same is 8. So I'm going to put my 8s here. Well, now how the heck do I figure out what sign goes in between them? Well, my C term is negative, and in order for my B terms to cancel, I need to have opposite signs. So I need a positive 8 and a negative 8. And if I set this equal to 0, I'm going to essentially get a positive 8 and a negative 8. So you can write it like this, or you can just say positive plus. Alright, let's practice a little bit more here with some zero product properties. Alright, 24. I'm going to figure out the factors of 24. 1 and 24. 2 and 12. 3 and 8. I believe 4 and 7. Or 6, sorry. 5 doesn't go into it, and then we just start repeating. Alright, so these are my factors. What I know here is I need to break both of them out, but my A term up here has a 2, meaning one of the P's needs to be a 2 because the factors of 2 are 2 and 1. So I have a 2P and a 1P. Now I need to be aware, this negative sign here for the C tells me it needs to be it needs to be a positive and a negative. This negative B term, this negative 8, tells me that the larger value, so like if I'm doing 1 and 20, the factors of 1 and 24, 2 times 24 needs to be higher. So any number times 2 needs to be negative, and the other one needs to be positive. Well, let's see. Negative 24 plus a 1, that gives me negative 25. So that's way too high. Negative 12 times 2 is going to give me negative 24 plus 2, which is way too high. Alright. Negative 8 times 2, because remember this is a 2p, it needs to be multiplied. 2p is going to give me 16. If I subtract 16 from 3, it's still too high. Alright, let's try 6. 6 times 2 is 12. Negative 12 plus 4 does in fact give me a negative 8. Woohoo! So there are my two numbers, positive 4 and a negative 6. Again, now we factored them out, and the only difference between factoring and the zero product property is setting them both equal to 0. So now I'm going to set them both equal to 0 and solve for p. The first side I need to get rid of the positive 4 by subtracting it. Divide by 2, so p equals negative 2. And on this side, p minus 6. If I add the 6 over, there's my two answers. Woohoo! So now I want you to try the next one on your own, and I want you to see what you get. Alright, the two options you should have chose is x net minus 2 and x plus 8. Now if you had x plus 8 first, that's okay. It doesn't matter which order you put them in. It's completely up to you. If you like the larger numbers first, it's okay. As long as you got a final answer of x equals 2 and x equals negative 8, boom, it's perfect. So now let's move on to the actual quadratic formula problems. Just as a quick reminder, the formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So now that I know that formula, I need to make sure that each of my quadratic equations are set equal to 0. And in this first case, it's not set equal to 0. That's my c term. So in order to move my c term over, all I need to do is do the opposite of the sign. Whoops. Which is subtract. Now remember, I can't combine these two because one has an x and one does not. Also, one is my a term and one is my c term. So, alright, now I'm going to label my a's. A is 6. I don't have a b term, so I'm going to put that as 0. I still technically have one, it's just 0. And my c term is negative 42. So I have negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, I'm going to get out my trusty calculator because guess what? That's what you can do. I'm going to multiply all of my numbers together. Oops. And I'm going to get 1,008. So since these zeros are here, all you're going to do is bring the plus minus over. 6 times 2 is 12. Alright. And I have a negative and a positive and a negative. Negative times a negative is a positive. Positive times positive is positive. So now I have positive 1,008. Let's see if that's a perfect square. It's not a perfect square. How I know is because I get a decimal. I don't get a clean, nice number. So on your test, you're just going to leave it as is. Leave it exactly like that. Alright. You're going to leave it just like that because we don't want any more factored out. So my a term for the next one is 1. I actually have a b this time, which is 10. My c term is 8. And now I can work. I have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times 8 all over 2 times 1. Alright, let's get to work then now. Alright, so out in front I essentially have a negative 10 because if I distribute the negative, it'll become negative plus or minus, I know 10 times itself is 100, and 8 times 4 is going to give me a negative 32 over 2. And remember, on your test, you want to make sure you do all of the steps so that way we can see what you're working with. We would rather give you partial points than no points at all if you just put the answer. So the square root that I would get is 68. And let's see if it's a perfect square. Nope, I get a decimal. So you're going to stop the train there and circle your large answer. Some hints on a test I will give you is make sure you show your work and circle your answer, especially if you get really super messy or you really can't tell where your answer is. That's my biggest suggestion. Alright, let's move on to the next two here. I have my a, which is 1, which is always attached to x squared. My b is always attached to the regular x, which is negative 8. My c is negative 20. Ooh, I get 2 negatives this time. Now remember, the formula says negative b. Since my b is negative, put it in parentheses. That's another big hint, so you don't turn it back to its negative form. And then I have negative 8 squared minus 4 times 1 times a negative 20 all over 2 times 1, which is a. Alright, 2 negatives make a positive, so I have a positive 8, which definitely will come in factored later. 8 squared is 64. Now here, remember, I have a negative 4 times 1, which gave me a negative 4. Now I have negative 4 times 20, which gives me 2 negatives make a positive. So make sure you pay close attention to that sign. And make sure you get the sign right, or everything else will be completely off. Alright, 64 plus 80 is going to give me 144. I do think that's a perfect square. I know my perfect squares pretty well. Well, hopefully you do as well. Well, I know that it is actually going to be 8 plus or minus, the square root of 144 is 12 all over 2. So I'm actually going to have 2 answers here. I'm actually going to have 8 plus 12 over 2 and 8 minus 12 over 2. So I'm going to have 2 different answers. 12 plus 8 is 20, divided by 2 is 10. And so now I have negative 4 over 2, which actually gives me a negative 2. So my 2 answers for this one are 10 and negative 2. For the next few here, I'm going to have you try them. I'm going to show you what the answer is and then try the next few. Alright, so for the next one, your final answer should have been 12 plus or minus the square root of 288 divided by 4. Now, if you put the square root of 288 in, you'd get a decimal, and that is where you would stop. You just leave it as is. So take a moment, pause the screen. I'm going to start on the next one. Alright, so for the second to last one, this is what you should have gotten. You should have got A is 3, B is negative 12, C is 2. And when you distribute it all out, you got the square root of 120, which is not a perfect square. So you would stop and leave it as is. Now, try the last one. Alright, so for this last one, what you actually had to do first is distribute this x minus 3. You needed to break them up because there's a number squared means there's 2 of them. You had to break them up, FOIL it out, and then you would get down to your standard form here. With the x squared minus 6x plus 8 equals 0. What you had to do is combine them all together. You'd get 36 minus 32 in the square root symbol. That would give you a square root of 4, which is a perfect squared. And then you would get your final answers here, 4 and 2. Now remember, if you do have any of the ones that have x plus or something, squared, plus 3 minus 3, whatever, make sure you break it out first because this 1 is not your c. It's actually positive 8. Well, have a great day, and hopefully you're going to do, well, I know you're going to do amazing on your test. Just breathe and make sure you know what the formula is.